So from the leaks, a new reaction in the game has been unveiled, which is Lunar Crystallize. It's just a reaction that transforms the normal Crystallize that happens between Hydro and Geo, and it turns it into Lunar Crystallize with the right enablers in your team. In this video, I'll just be visiting this reaction, explaining it, seeing what it does, and then finally seeing its impact on Geo in general, and especially the older Geo characters. Is it gonna revive some characters and make them usable again, or is it just simply restricted to new characters? We're gonna figure this out in this video. Before we continue that though, if you're trying to get Genesis crystals, I would recommend getting them throughout ldshop.gg. It's a cheap, fast, and secure game top-up website where you can get different games currencies, including Genshin Impacts, 30% cheaper or more. Check it out in the link in the description or the pinned comment. Alright, so Lunar Crystallize is simply that when you have an enabler in your team, which is just Columbina at this point, when Geo and Hydro meet, they don't do like just the normal crystallized shard like usual, they do a Lunar Crystallize. 3 lunar things are just gonna spawn around the target and they basically just deal damage. The thing is, the Lunar Crystallize damage is first of all gonna be AoE, which is gonna be super good. A lot of Geos do lack that. It's also gonna scale with Elemental Mastery, which have been just completely absent from most Geos. You rarely want to have Elemental Master on any Geo in the game, honestly, but right now this might change. I'm gonna visit the damage formula soon and explain why it's not gonna affect your builds like in a huge way, but still in general, Elemental Mastery is not gonna be completely useless on Geo characters now. And then most importantly, it's gonna scale with crit. So you definitely want to build crit rate and crit damage on your characters because the Lunar Crystallized damage is gonna be scaling off of their crit damage. So obviously this in general is simply just gonna change Geo from being like a completely sort of defensive element in general to more of like an offensive element right now when mixed with Hydro and the right enabler. Lunar Crystallize does deal a lot of damage, and it's also boostable by your stats like crit rate and crit damage normally, and that's obviously super good. If we're looking at the formula for the Lunar Crystallize, the final reaction damage is just going to be the direct damage multipliers, and then multiplied by 1, 6 Elemental Mastery, divided by Elemental Mastery plus 2000, plus the damage bonus if you have any Lunar Crystallize damage bonus, and then it scales with the resistance and elevation and the crit. This is going to be the formula for each character in your team when trigger Lunar Crystallize. Now the final damage for the Lunar Crystallize is going to be a mix from all of your characters in your team too, but it's going to be the highest plus half of the second highest, and then plus 1 out of 12 from the third highest, and then also 1 out of 12 from the fourth highest. So as you guys can see here, we do that damage formula at the top for every single character, and then we're just going to mix them with the highest character having the highest weights. That means whatever character has like more Lunar Crystallized damage bonus, or Elemental Mastery, crit rate, resistance shred, blah blah blah, his damage is going to be the highest, and it's going to be the damage that's going to be counted as the main damage for Lunar Crystallize. The second character is just going to be counted as half, and then we're going to see a dramatic fall for the third and fourth characters. There's just going to be 1 out of 12, which is very small. What does that mean? Is simply you don't need to build all of your team for Lunar Crystallize, and usually the characters you want to build with the whole like Elemental Mastery and crit and stuff like that is probably going to be the other characters on your team, like the Hydro enabler for example, or maybe like a Geo character. But in general, you're not going to need to change your Geo builds and include like Elemental Mastery and stuff like that, because it's not going to matter, because usually they're going to fall as the third and the fourth, and their damage in general is not going to matter as much. Basically the same thing as the Lunar Charged. It's almost the exact same thing, but it's happening with the Lunar Crystallize. The multipliers though are going to be much less than the Lunar Charged. It's like almost half, but then also the Lunar Crystallize doesn't have no internal cooldowns or anything like that. So you can probably trigger it much more than Lunar Charged, and in general it's going to be around the same amounts of damage, at least in my opinion. I didn't do any calculations yet, but it's definitely going to be considerable damage. Just seeing Lunar Charged and how much damage it deals, even if it's half of that damage, it's still going to be considerable, especially considering that Crystallize didn't do any damage before. It was just simple shields, and it didn't really do much damage at all. So if we're just including Columbina as an enabler in teams that are already dealing like damage on their own, like Geo teams, any extra damage is going to be heavily appreciated, and it's probably going to offset any like support replacements that she might take their place. But yeah, talking about Columbina and the enablers, to enable Lunar Crystallize, there's not really many ways right now. The only like simple universal way is just gonna be Columbina. If you have Columbina on your team, she's gonna turn any Crystallize Hydra reaction into Lunar Crystallize. There are other characters like Seaby for example, but she's just gonna enable it for herself, but there are no supports that can enable Lunar Crystallize except for Columbina, and honestly I don't think they will be. So if you want to play Lunar Crystallize on your team, then Columbina is probably gonna be needed, and like 90% 90% of the teams. If we're looking at like a full Lunar Crystallize perfect team, you'd probably want to have somebody like Sibai and then Columbina. You can have a second Hydro as your support. So for example, like Yellen, Shangsho, or whatever, and then you can have another Geo as like a Geo applier or also Geo support. For example, like Albedo, Zhongli, Zhaolin, whatever. Albedo and Zhongli are going to be pretty valuable in these teams, and that's because they apply very consistent Geo damage. And if you pair them with another consistent Hydro applier like Shangsho, for example, or Yellen, you're going to be applying a lot of Hydro and Geo, and with no internal cooldown, you're going to be creating a lot of Lunar Crystallize thingies. What do they call them? Moondrifts. That means you're going to be triggering Lunar Crystallize much more often than any reaction, and that's going to be super good. This team you're looking at right now is probably going to be the best team in the game, or close to the best. Definitely top 3 or top 2 at C0, by the way. So that says how strong Lunar Crystallize is going to be, at least in its perfect form. Now to the main point of our video, which is older Geo characters. Are they going to be affected or upgraded in any way by Lunar Crystallize? And I would say for a lot of them, yes, this is going to be true. We've already seen a couple of Geo characters been updated to be at least compatible with Lunar Crystallize. For example, Navia is now going to be able to gain her crystals when Lunar Crystallize is triggered. And that's going to first of all make her compatible with like Lunar Crystallize teams. And then also it's going to make her easier to play in my opinion, because you don't need to pick up the shards and run around and stuff like that. It's just going to be simply automatic. Every time you do Lunar Crystallize, you can get your crystals for Navia. As I said, also characters like Albedo, Zhongli are going to gain significant more value in my opinion. Even Shiori is going to be there because they're simply just going to be like off-field Geo appliers, and that's going to be super appreciated in these type of teams. You definitely need consistent Geo applied for you to be able to trigger enough Geo Crystallize reactions. And as I said, it doesn't have any internal cooldowns, so that means sky's the limit. So any character that can apply fast Geo consistently is going to be heavily appreciated, and off-field characters like that offer utility and also apply huge amounts of Geo are going to be super appreciated for sure. So yes, characters like Zhongli and Albedo, maybe Shiori too, are definitely going to see a pretty good increase in their value in my opinion. Now for the characters that you're probably most interested about whether or not they're going to gain an upgrade are mainly just pure Geo main DPSs like Ito for example, or even the 4-star Ningguang. With those characters, first of all, I think they do work with Lunar Crystallize. The main thing you need is simply just going to be Columbina and then another not cry character, for example probably Iluga in these types of teams. This is going to be the main core, and then you can add your Geo main DPS and then any Geo support or any support you want. So for Ito and Navia, they could work in these type of teams, so you can have them like Ito and Ningguang, and then you can add like Gore or Bennett or whatever, and then Columbina is the main enabler, and then probably Iluga is going to be pretty important too, preferably C2, but even if not C2, you probably still want to include him in your team just for the lunar sign for Columbina. But yeah, in this team combination, it's going to be pretty good for these characters. They're going to be able to deal good damage. They're going to lose out on the damage bonus they were getting, but they're going to be triggering extra damage from triggering those Lunar Crystallize reactions. And I think for most of them, it is going to be an upgrade over their like classical teams, at least a small upgrade. I've seen some calculations for Ito specifically, and his team with Goru, Columbina, and Iluga is going to be dealing like 92k DPS or something like that. Mind you, C6 Goru and Iluga, which is going to be pretty good for C0 Ito. Usually most of his teams are going to be like 60, 70k or something around that. So in my opinion, I do think this is going to be a pretty significant upgrade. Now you can argue that this is not an Ito team, it's more of a Columbina team. And I guess, sure, that is true. You need like half of the team to be a not cry core for this type of team to work. But in general, yes, it could revive the old Geo main DPSs pretty well. I do think it's going to be worth it. And I definitely do think it's going to be at least a slight upgrade for most Geo characters in the game. So yes, for the final answer, is Lunar Crystallize gonna revive Geo? I would say yes. It will increase the value for Geo. It will make it better at least a little bit. We're gonna see how much better is it gonna make it in the future, but for right now, it will for sure be an upgrade. Tell me, what do you guys think? Are you gonna be using any older Geo units now? What are you planning to do with Lunar Crystallize? Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.